Back on Morning Line. Thanks for joining us. Our guest, Davidson County Sheriff Daron Hall, and we were just talking about the Friedmann case. Fascinating. We should just say that sentencing is going to be next week for him, and he faces, 25 to 40 years for the conviction on the vandalism here. He also faces a further sentencing in federal court. So, but I mean, he's not someone who has a clean criminal background. He's a prior felony, so he's higher range, right? So he could face the upper end of that sentence. Yeah,
and Nick, something I never thought through very well, but when we first went into this whole situation and carried all the information to the DA's office, they were very gracious to help us because it was a complicated situation. But when they first told me we're going to pursue vandalism charges, and I remember saying to them, this is not a spray painting a building thing, and because that's the first thing that jumps to mind. Roger Moore and others, been here forever, does a great job. But he explained it to me over the time that basically, other than murder, a Class A felony is the highest level you can go.
Right.
I mean, and so they knew that if we could prove that it was over $250,000 worth of vandalism, then you're in a Class A felony, and that opens up the range from 25 to 40. I mean, even attempted murder, attempted burglary, attempted escape. There was just not really anything you could put on him.
No, it was really brilliant.
It was smart, and it sounds weird even when you said it.
Because it caught me, just like you, off guard.
Me too. And you just said vandalism. I still go, man, that sounds weird.
Yeah.
But yeah, so he faces 25 to 40, and my hope is, and my belief is, we get to go over there and explain that to Judge Dozier, who gets to make the decision why this was not just vandalizing a building. I still believe there were going to be lives lost, and just because our staff and others outsmarted him in his plan, he doesn't deserve a break. The break shouldn't be, well, he may or may not have done anything. No, we were 14 days away from moving Travis Ranking, Sampson, and anybody else.
These mass murderers.
We're all going in that building. He knew that. We were 14 days away from moving in, and literally we were doing punch lists to open the building up. And so it was that close, and
you'll testify at sentencing? Well,
yes.
They will. You're absolutely right. The concern I think about him getting out, even if he gets the 40 years, which is the high end, which I think he's going to get, that's still, if he serves 30%, he could be out in 10 to 15 years. Then you wonder, in federal court, he faces a gun charge. I think, can that be up to 10 years? I'm not sure, but if he's convicted there, which he will be, or he'll be sentenced there. He's already been convicted. I think he'll be looking at whether it's consecutive or concurrent.
Yeah, that's the key in the federal piece.
Yeah, if it's consecutive, then it adds on. Because I don't like Friedman's what? How old is he now?
54, maybe.
54. He could be out in his mid-60s, and I see him trying to do something like this again.
Well, and they asked me that you asked me this on a year or two ago when he filed some federal lawsuit about his housing and conditions and all that. One of the things, and they asked me this in the trial. One of the things you have to realize is he had this plot about a massive escape and the plot against harming people, inmates and staff in the building. So from my perspective, wherever he goes and lives, that's what you evaluate to determine classification and status while you're in prison. So he needs to be handled in that way. He was not addicted. How many times have I been on here asking for understanding of people who are changing their lives? This man took advantage of what, and really was a total lie. It was a total false. What he did for years, and took advantage of that. He testified in Congress, been on every network in the country. He's done all these things, and was
as an advocate for prison reform,
for safe jails and prisons. He wanted inmates to be safe. He wanted not necessarily the staff, but safe. He wanted to make sure that policies were, fair for all, and this and that. And while he's doing that for 5 years, he was dressing in one thing and going in and pretending to be something. It's an evil plot. There's no other word around it. That's not a mental health problem, right? I mean, you don't have something for 5 years and plot. It's 9/11. I'm surely not comparing it to the loss, but how hard they practiced and how to learn to fly a plane. This guy was learning to destroy concrete, and how do I repair it once I get the guns back in it where they won't know? He had to paint, he had to use putty and epoxy. And
fascinating. And the video, we saw it all. He captured it, and it looked real. And he knew exactly. Let's take a call or two. We've got James. James, good morning. Hi, James.
My question is, man, what kind of psycho trip was he on? Who did he have a Jones against that he was going after? And yes, I did hear they're wanting to make a movie out of this.
Maybe talk, if you can. We don't have to delve real deeply into it, but you've certainly gone way back in this guy's background, and we all wonder the same thing he just asked. Where did it snap? But I mean, aside from other prior charges, I mean, going back to his childhood, did this guy, not to make any excuses for him, but if you look back at his past, do you see, you know, issues that maybe shaped him?
So we have a woman that works for us who works in our research and development area, and so when this thing first happened, for a couple of reasons, I went to her and said, hey, well, just do all you can. You know, figure out what you can on this person. And by the way, I would never want, I've told her, she knows everything about me, even though I don't want her to know, because she's incredibly skilled at that. And yeah, there's a lot of things in there. Here's the obvious signs that we should have figured out as a society. I mean, he's a narcissist. I mean, he is. And the reason I know that is when he's arrested at 18 years old, he gets probation. He then gets rearrested on probation, which, by the way, he was arrested at 18 for armed robbery. He shot at a person 6 times in a gift store in Green Hills. So he's on probation for that. He gets picked up for shoplifting, so it violates the original probation, sends him away for 10 years. The 10 years was for the armed robbery that he had probation on. He gets to prison. It turned out to be a private prison. The brand new CCA was new at the time. He goes to South Central and does time there. Instead of accepting responsibility for carrying a gun and shooting at a person 6 times, he began to obsess over this private prison industry thing. Now, you can be for or against private prisons. He really doesn't give 2 cents about private prisons. He cares about Alex Friedmann, and all he really cared about was, how do I get out of what I'm doing? And so he made a living convincing people that prisons were bad and how they treat people are bad. And in the whole time, he never took responsibility for anything he'd ever done. Still hasn't taken responsibility. Goes to prison for this. What does he do? Sues me for housing him wrong. What does he do? He goes. So that personality, that person, is very predictable, right? There will never be an admission of what he did. You'll never hear from him what was going on. I told you a minute ago, he married a woman in 2019, right in the middle of this passion. He was stuck in the middle of. She worked for the state of Tennessee, had a house, has a place to live. That's pretty clear to me. I've been contacted by people from out of state who I had an hour-long conversation with this woman, sexually assaulted her, stole her money just a few years ago in Nashville. And there's just so much to it. There's some family history that's unique and weird. He has some very, you know.
Does he have siblings?
No.
No, okay.
And his family doesn't claim him, hasn't for years, nor does he claim his family.
He was born here?
He was born in Boston.
Boston, okay.
Moved to Saudi Arabia when he was 4.
Saudi Arabia for a while, and then, wow, with his
and
parents.
And he returned to Nashville at age 15 and lived with his grandmother.
Well, I just wonder, okay, so he always then had something not quite right, because there are inmates who serve time, who get out and realize, you know, there are problems with our system. Maybe I can help and genuinely advocate for some legitimate reform. And you'd agree, there's things that can be improved on. You met with Alex Friedmann, so you wanted to work with him. But where did he snap? And I'm guessing, based on what you just said, this guy was twisted well before even he started that plot 5 years, you know, early, you know. But somewhere on the line, this thing, somehow he thought this was a good idea. And I think you may have hit it that he wanted to be a martyr. I mean, ultimately, if he ended up getting the guns, breaking out, getting a bunch of inmates with weapons and arming them, I mean, he would have been killed. I mean, but gosh knows what other bloodshed there would have been. Where on earth? It's like, what?
And James asked a really good question. You know, what was his beef with what? It was. Here's what tells you he was never real. If it was really what he supposedly cared about and lied about for 20 years, it was private prisons. This wasn't a private jail. It wasn't managed properly. It was never going to be. He knew that. So if it was about what he cared about, it wasn't about what he cared about. It was all, that whole facade of that was just an attention-seeking way for him to make a living. It's just the truth. Make a living in the wrong way. Now, what I'm talking about is, it was all about private prisons and how bad they are, and he's sued them multiple times. The reality of it is, if this facility was private...
Oh, there's construction. All right, we're going to take a break because we're doing construction in the building. They didn't mean to interrupt you. We'll be back with more right after this. Stay with us.